Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the OnePlus 7 and see how this specific phone holds up in 2022. Now what I will definitely tell you is that this phone is great in so many areas. It's a little bit weird in some areas too, but there's one thing for sure, we've never really seen a demise of a company like OnePlus right now. It seems like the hype of this company has kind of gone down, and it's kind of sad because the OnePlus 7, in my opinion, including the 7 Pro, were such amazing devices. I was such a huge fan of these phones, and I think they're still really good in so many different ways, but there may be some better phones out there that you would probably recommend, that I would probably recommend buying for you as well, that those may be better options. But let's go and see how this one holds up. If you want to purchase some phones, I would recommend, links are down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of the OnePlus 7, on the front we have a 6.41-inch optic AMOLED display, and it's a full HD panel. Now there's no 90Hz, it's still stuck at 60Hz, but in my opinion that's still totally okay. This was kind of the base model, this was kind of like the cheapest one they were offering at that moment, and I actually kind of like the display. There's a little tiny bit of bezel on the bottom. There's a Infinity V display, whatever they called it at that time, and like I mentioned, I think it's okay. I think it's definitely a really good looking panel. It's not ugly. They could have made a way worse looking panel than this thing. So at this time, for the price tag that they were kind of releasing this thing at, I think the panel itself was actually pretty decent. Now we also had a fingerprint sensor in the display, which was also really cool. We had a USB Type-C port on this thing. We had a full glass back as well, which looked really nice. And we had a dual camera setup as well. Now that's just with the outside. There are some things, this phone isn't perfect, but I do think it looks pretty good overall, and without a doubt, this is still a really good looking phone in my opinion. Now that's with the outside and exterior of this device. Now it does get a little bit more complicated when you look at these specific features of this phone compared to phones that we have nowadays. So we didn't have any IP certification on this phone, which I did find really weird. The fact that they were able to release a phone in 2019, about 3 years ago, that did not have a, IP certification on it was actually very weird, and I wasn't really super aware why they did that, and it was just very awkward. But they also didn't give us wireless charging on this phone either. Now in my opinion, I don't even like wireless charging, but I like having that ability, and maybe it's going to slowly die on me a little bit, but it's still extremely weird that, OnePlus actually went down this route. I feel like they could have done a way better, situation here. They could have given us, maybe, wireless charging and not given us IP certification one way or the other. But the fact they didn't give us either one of those things is very weird. But to harp on that for 30 minutes is kind of strange. So I'll just definitely say a little bit weirder of an experience. I feel like they could have done a little bit better there. But let's go and hit on the cameras. So like I mentioned, we had that dual camera setup on the back, a 48 megapixel wide angle lens, then a 5 megapixel depth camera. And on the front, we had a 16 megapixel lens. Now, this is what I will probably tell you about this specific camera. It's a little complicated, okay? So let me take you back to 2019. We had phones like the Galaxy S10 that came out. We had phones like even like the LG G8 that had that triple camera setup for one of those models. We had the iPhone 11 series come out too. And for this phone to have a single camera setup like this, basically, it just already seemed a little bit outdated in my opinion. Now, this camera was never known as the best camera of 2019. I would definitely give that more probably to the S10 or 11 Pro Max, but this is still an okay camera at best. I feel like OnePlus has kind of dropped the ball on so many different cameras that have came out, even with the OnePlus 9. I feel like that phone didn't really have that good of a camera either. But with this one, with its pretty much single camera lens on the back, it just wasn't a good look in my opinion. And as I mentioned before, I feel like OnePlus could have done a little bit of a better job here. Now with the UI itself, there's still some features built in, there's still a lot of stuff all across the board, but I feel like when it came down to it, OnePlus had a choice. They were either going to go ahead and, spend a lot of their development money making both phones great, or they were going to spend most of their development money on the OnePlus 7 Pro, and I think that's what they did. They shifted their attention all on the 7 Pro, but it's weird because the OnePlus 7T, I think was actually a really good upgrade. The 7T, the 7 to the 7T, was a better upgrade than the 7 to the 7T Pro in my opinion. So when it comes down to this camera, no 4K at 60 on the front, which is very strange, especially in 2019 when phones were pretty much getting that left and right. But 4K at 60 on the back on this phone I think is good. We just have no extra sensors, which I am not a fan of at all. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of software on this phone, what I'll definitely tell you is, with a phone like this, it is in a very interesting spot because it came out with Android 9. I think it did get Android 11, the stock developer of these phones. So it went from Oxygen OS to now whatever, Color OS, I think it is now. It's very weird that, a company like OnePlus, whose software was so beautiful, their software was some of the best software in the game at that time, for them to go ahead and shift it away to make something like this phone now was just so strange. And I just never understood why OnePlus, had such a huge demise with their software, because personally their software, in my opinion, was actually some of the best software ever. I feel like it was amazing, and that in and of itself made me super happy with this type of device. But going forward, it puts it in a very interesting situation where I would probably recommend going straight and probably customizing your, OnePlus at that time. That may be a better option for some people, and that may make a lot more sense for some people, is just rooting your OnePlus 7 and seeing if there are any ROMs available. That may make a lot more sense for some people, and that is probably what I would recommend going down the road for, is rooting your OnePlus 7 and then custom ROMing it. And that may make a little bit more sense for some people. So in terms of that, that's kind of how I see the software development standpoint. Now, hitting on the actual performance standpoint, this device had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset with 6 gigs of RAM on the base model and 8 gigs of RAM on the mid-tier model, and then 12 gigs of RAM on the top-tier model. So this is another example where something like the OnePlus 7 at that time was actually really, really important. I feel like the performance of this device was actually pretty decent, and that may have been a pretty decent, aspect, for this specific phone. Now, what I will definitely tell you is with the OnePlus 7, you are still getting a pretty decent performing device. And I think this is a really cool thing about this phone. When you're getting something like the OnePlus 7 and you're pretty much, just expecting a pretty decent performing phone, you are definitely going to be getting it on this type of device. This is not an extremely outdated phone, so that's number one. But this is also not an extremely, expensive phone. This is fairly cheap. But also, this phone, came out when the OnePlus 7 Pro came out. And I think the OnePlus 7 Pro may be a better phone for probably a lot more people just because it has that 90Hz refresh rate and everything. But with something like the OnePlus 7, I think this phone still has a lot of performance built in. I just think the software as of right now is a little bit different. But I would just probably tell you that when it comes down to it, the OnePlus 7 is still completely worth it in terms of the performance standpoint, in my opinion. Now, hitting on the actual battery life, this thing had a 3700 mAh battery inside of it, and this may be another area of this phone that was actually pretty positive. I think with a phone like the OnePlus 7, it's still really good in terms of the battery life department, as long as this thing didn't have the most amount of battery degradation ever. But regardless, I think when it comes down to it, the OnePlus 7 is still completely worth it in 2022. I think this phone still has a ton of power built in, and I definitely do think even on top of that, this type of device is extremely, extremely beautiful. I think when you look at some other phones in the market, things like the OnePlus 7T, things like the Google Pixel and those ones, I think this phone is still worth it in that standpoint. However, there are a lot more phones that I would recommend going down the road for. Things like the Google Pixel 5, the Pixel 6, possibly the OnePlus 8, maybe a little bit better here and there. You can go for even the Google Pixel 5a, that may be a better phone than this thing in some areas. The OnePlus 7 Pro I would recommend more than this thing. I think this phone is good, but I feel like because of the other phones, surrounding this, even the Galaxy S10, I think that phone may be a little bit better too. Those devices may be better options than, maybe the OnePlus 7, but that's kind of how I see this phone in 2022. I would love to hear your opinion on this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.